I'm going to call to order the Finance and Audit Committee meeting for November the 7th at 3 p.m. And read the statement of announcement. A news release announcing the date, time, and place of the November 7th, 2019 Finance and Audit Committee meeting was distributed November 5th, 2019 to appropriate media and other groups or individuals who have requested notification. The announcement and agenda were posted at the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs Central Administrative Office and on the website. The public has been notified that accommodations such as interpreters, mobility assistance, or other assistance will be provided to individuals with disabilities and special needs if requested in advance. So the first item on the agenda are the amendments over $200,000. So Chris or Pat, if you want to go through the items listed here with some explanation, that'd be great.
All right, I'll handle that. So the commission has a requirement that any amendment we do with our provider network that exceeds $200,000 needs to come through you all. So we've got 4 that we need to act on, and I know the commission doesn't have a formal voting body at this time, but at some point, if y'all will consider this as a committee, if we could use the executive privilege or whatever it's called to go ahead and effectuate these amendments, if you approve them in here, that would be great, because we are holding a lot of money up for some of these providers. The other providers that are under 200,000, of course, have already gotten all their amendments.
Yeah, I think
Well, they're not. She's not seeing us.
Oh, okay.
Laura, you can't. Or Robin, you can't see us, right?
No, I can see you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the. All right, great.
Thank you.
So, if they're under 200,000, those providers have already received all their amendments. They're getting paid and so forth. So, it kind of puts us in a bind as far as getting these providers their funds. But the first one up is the Pickens County Board. They opened a new SLP project in coordination with, I think it's SWU.
Southern Wesleyan University.
Southern Wesleyan, and it's a Jericho project, and they're have an 8-bed project that they're opening. They have 5 folks. They've already moved in, and they've backfilled they had an existing SLP program, and even though they've got these new beds, they've been able to backfill the folks so that they're actually serving 5 new people at this time. So the largest chunk of these funds are related to that. There are 5 SLP2 slots, as well as restoring the vacancy in one of their homes, and then a termination of one of their SLP1 slots. Now, the point I would like to make, most of y'all have heard us talk about our rate split situation with our residential programs and how it's unfavorable. With SLP2, it's really the only program we have where the rate split is to our advantage. This will actually generate additional revenue for the agency, so in addition to what we're going to be paying them. So we'll generate an extra $162,000 a year because of that rate split. So we get reimbursed $187.66 for all of our residential programs that are paid on a daily rate. We pay the provider using last year's numbers, so it's apples to apples, $89.12. I mean, the split is $89.12. So we make, if you will, or generate almost $90 a day for those folks. So SLP2 is one of those programs that we do actually generate additional revenues from.
One of the few.
One of the few. So that actually helps us. Gary, did you have a question? You kind of had a puzzled look on.
No, just this, and I'm trying to make sure that Lori and Robin are up to speed on this one. This partnership with Southern Wesleyan has been the subject of some controversy, and I could not remember whether you guys were 100% on board with that.
I personally have not heard about the controversy. I have toured this project and went to a kind of an open house about a month ago and met the executive director, Elaine. Thina, and was really impressed with the project. But I had not heard of any controversies about it.
And I don't know either.
And so sort of going back on this, it had a great deal to do with who was getting the benefit from this in terms of any benefit that was accruing to the university, and whether those funds were appropriate, that they were receiving some benefits from that. I think in terms of redoing the housing, the residence hall, or the facility, whatever the case may be. There were people who had an issue with this partnership. I was not one of them. I also was very impressed by the idea of the integration, but I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware that there are people out there that are not thrilled to death with this particular project because there was this question about where the benefit was going.
Well, I know it's a unique model that hasn't really been used before within, I guess, DDSN residential, programming. But I know, I mean, it was a brand new building that was built. They fundraised, I believe, for that construction of the actual dorm. It's like a dorm is what it's kind of like to me.
Right.
But apartment style living, but more of a dorm, somewhat of a dorm. But
And I'm not saying not. I'm simply wanting to make sure you guys were aware that it was not without its controversies. Even though, again, I personally, everything I heard about the program sounded like it was the kind of integration that's exactly what we were looking for in terms of bringing our consumers into an integrated environment.
Yeah. Yep.
But
Okay. Well,
everything has its ups and downs.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Go back and explain. The agency DDSN receives $187 per day and pays the provider $89 per day. Is that what you were saying?
Well, $98.
I'll hit it only because I
Okay.
swam in this for so long. The way it works is DDSN, we want to offer a variety of settings based on needs. But
Yep.
HHS doesn't want to give us an individual rate for all settings. So the agreed upon procedure many, many years ago was, we'll give you one rate, $187 a day. DDSN, you do the math to take that amount of money per day and spread it among these settings so that you get your admin and you cover your costs. So it is really, for example, I would say anything H-band or above, which is 60% of our settings, we get $187 a day and we're spending out $220 a day. So there's a lot more losers than winners. So and we're not, no one's getting hurt by all this, because from a consumer's perspective, we're paying a rate that's fair. This is just an accounting transaction with HHS. And our problem over the years has been, we have not managed that rate sufficiently so that the money we're getting from HHS actually covers our costs. Our costs are greater. And so we're trying to rectify that now with rate adjustments.
And those, if you look at fiscal year 19's residential service delivery and how that mix panned out for us, we lost in excess of $20 million because of that rate split. So it's not to our advantage overall. There are winners and losers, if you will, within each service line. But overall, DDSN loses money in residential.
Okay.
So, does that help?
Yep, that's exactly what I needed to know. Thank you.
Do you want to approve these one at a time or consider them one at a time, or do you want to go through all four?
Let's go through all four.
Okay. All right. So we have two fiscal agents that manage respite payroll and in-home supports and attendant care for the state for certain providers that have chosen to enroll with them.
Yep.
They're County and Charles Lee. Each of those entities manage the payroll for us. They get what I consider a very reasonable or small administrative fee. to do those things for us. These amendments are directly related to actual services to families related to respite and other in-home supports. Jasper is by far our largest agent.
Yeah.
We have analyzed their prior year. When I came in June, we had to give the commission a proposed contract on each of these folks. The contract that we rolled forward from the date at which time we did those contracts was short. We had another amendment in fiscal year 19 of $300,000 for Jasper that wasn't rolled in. So based on prior year 2019 numbers alone, we were short $300,000 rolling that forward. But looking at our utilization rate and looking at their financials and all the payroll data, we need to give them an increase of $1,599,338. Now let me ease your mind there as well. This is really weird. So we give the providers band payments, which in their money is respite services for the consumers for band B and I.
And you give it to them before they've actually rendered the service, right? Yeah.
Correct. So within their revenues is nestled inside there is this bucket of service, is this pot of services. We recoup based on files given to us by each of these providers, payroll for each of these different providers that are enrolled with each of them based on the actual payroll plus FICA and unemployment. So we are made whole through that recoupment process. And then we also bill Medicaid for all these services as well, which helps us get our money back from the bands that we lay out. So it's four pieces really that touch this, but this is really just a cash flow transaction. It's not really anything other than that because we end up recouping all these funds out of our existing commitments that y'all have already approved.
Okay, so what was the reasoning behind paying the hour for services that you didn't know for sure if families were going to utilize or not ahead of time, in advance? What's the rationale for that?
Well, when the bands were built, there's a range of services that were figured in, and I don't think they hired an actuary or anything. They just did some magical calculations that include a bucket of services, and so on average, they looked at, this person in this setting, we use this many units of this service, and they just looked at historical data and generated these bands that we currently have. And I don't know if Pat wants to jump in here, but basically, the band system, that's part of the problem we're having right now is they haven't kept up with all the changes that have occurred, and we've got some rate issues that we're trying to address. Do you want to jump in and comment on the band system? I mean, this is part of the crux of why we're needing to leave the band system.
I think as it pertains to respite, I mean, the bands is just, it's an estimate. You take the whole portfolio of our services and you put that total money out there and you divide it by certain categories, and people get that, and people draw on their own band in different ways. So it has a lot to do with just averaging. Some use more, some use less, but it's an average cost methodology. And this 1.5 does seem like a big number, but their administrative cost is only $100,000.
It's only a 12% increase.
This is just, we have elected to show their activity in the contract, meaning if they process $10 million worth of respite a year, their contract's $10 million.
Correct.
But at the end of the day, that $10 million is they're getting 10.1 million, 100,000 for administration and $10 million for reimbursement for expenses. So it's really more of a cash flow issue than a increase in contract.
And the real issue is with Jasper in particular, they have expended considerably more at this point through November, than we've given them. And so they're having cash flow, we're creating cash flow issues for that agency. So we've had to advance them checks. We can't give them an amendment. So we've actually had to go out and grab a payment that was scheduled for the future and go ahead and send it to them because they'd be bouncing payroll checks. So they're really hurting for the cash because of this increase in the actual payroll that's being generated by them. And we've analyzed it. We're very comfortable that, and there is a reconciliation process. So at the end of the year, whatever's left over rolls into the next year, or if you owe them more money, which is what I'm going to talk to you about under item D. If at the end of the year they expended more, then we owe them an amendment for that.
Okay. All right. So, you want to go on Charles Lee?
Sure. Charles Lee, yes. Item C, theirs much smaller and theirs isn't growing as much. What we're seeing is a huge jump in in-home self-directed community supports waiver services, which is primarily handled by Jasper. So that's why we've got this huge increase there. On the Charles Lee side, they don't have that as many folks that they're doing payroll for, and their service mix isn't growing like Jasper's is. So we only need to bump theirs $409,167 to address their anticipated increase based on data through the end of October that we've obtained.
Okay.
Then item D, this was waiting on me when I got here in June. Basically, Charles Lee was waiting for a settlement on 18, never got resolved. We owed him like $300,000 for that year, and then 19 closed obviously since I've been here, and we owed him another $200,000 for that year. So this 525 is an actual settlement, if you will, which is simply, here's the money we gave you, here's what you paid out. And then we've balanced what they paid out, we've balanced back to ensure that we've recovered all those funds from the agencies. We did have a payroll file issue for March 2018 that got missed by them that cost us a little issue. But all the funds have been billed to Medicaid other than that, and recouped from the providers. So we have balanced all this throughout the whole system to make sure all the pieces are balancing. And internal audit was involved in some of this as well with Jasper. Eric Baker did a lot of background work for us, when they went out there and reviewed Jasper. So I want to thank Kevin and his team for helping us with that. Forgot to mention that part. But we feel very good about these numbers. We have killed this, actually. We've spent an inordinate amount of hours in finance trying to tie these numbers down.
Okay.
Not to mention internal audit's involvement.
All right. Well, then I guess I'll make a motion to approve amendments. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay.
So
Amendments approved. Yeah.
I think where we're going to be at then is that at such time when we actually have a quorum,
Right.
we need to have a vote to ratify all of these things that we've done in the finance committee. So let's add this onto that. But in the meantime, is everybody comfortable with us going ahead and actually, based upon the approval that we have here, going ahead and executing? We don't want to leave this money unpaid because we got people who need it. So
Yeah.
are we good with that?
Yes.
Okay. Does that give you guys enough direction? Even
Yep.
and it's just a product of where we're stuck right now without a
Right,
quorum,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Thank you. Well, we'll get the contracts going and signed, and as soon as we get the executed contracts back, we'll get the cash flow running.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So the next item, number 4.
All right. Well, the legislature approved a cost of living adjustment for all provider and QPL, DSM board and QPL employees, and they put it in our funding for our budget. The issue we have is that we no longer fund case management and EI through contracts. We fund it through a rate because we're fee for service. So we have received $443,000 state funds, which then get matched by Medicaid, ideally. It then turns into a rate increase for our provider network so that they can give these raises to these employees. The issue is Medicaid has been slow to agree to, and we think they finally have, a rate increase for case management and early intervention to provide an increase to funding so that these providers can give this 2% raise to their employees. The problem is the legislative intent is that every employee in these agencies get this raise, and our payment mechanism doesn't allow us to pass those funds on without Medicaid agreeing to an increase. Well, they're indicating preliminarily right now that the rate increase will be effective January 2020. So what the problem with that is the legislature says this is effective the first payroll in July. So we've got a 6-month period where the rate increase won't be paid, but we're required to give the raise to the employees. So we've got this $221,000 for that 6-month period of state funds that we've got to figure out what we're going to do about it. One of the providers recommended that we take these funds and distribute it in an equitable manner to all the providers and let them use those funds to partially offset a 2% raise for these employees so that they can implement it July 1 like they're supposed to. The problem is this isn't going to be enough money for them to do that because we can't draw down the federal match part. But the reason I'm bringing this to y'all is we're stuck between the legislative intent and what's in our law and our provisos. And then we've got HHS over here that's saying we'll do something, but only effective January 2020. So we got to figure out what we're going to do about the July to December time frame. And so we're just bouncing this off y'all and bringing you up to speed. We can take this to, Mary has said, either we need to give all the money back to the legislature and say, look, we can't execute this as y'all intended. If we keep their money, we've got to give it to the providers or use it as match to draw down federal dollars. And since they're not going to do anything until January 2020, we're stuck with this $220,000 and need to know what to do with it. So wanted to just kind of ask y'all for your opinion. See if you had any questions or suggestions.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the problem with it, like you said, is if we just pay out the cash, we're not generating any federal match, and that's the worst use of our dollars. So that's not particularly appealing from that standpoint. It's lost opportunity to draw down those funds.
Would CMS backdate it, like do the match later, like a kind of a back pay or whatever?
No.
Backdate.
I mean, to be clear, we've been talking to Medicaid about this since June. Okay, so when you hear Pat's answer, I mean, just realize it's not like we were sitting on it. We've been pushing really hard.
Director Baker was very unsympathetic of giving us anything, and really Mary just wore him out, and he agreed to do it in January. So we're at least going to get a half year's, but there's no way he would make it retroactive to July 1st. I don't think he can legally do that, but it's a tough situation.
Can you start the story again and tell me how we got here? Like I understand the problem, I think, but I guess I missed the part about what happened to get us here so that we cannot effectuate the legislature's intent and get a match.
Right. I'll give it a shot. It's a tough one.
Okay.
When the General Assembly says give them a 2% raise, what they really mean is we'll give you 30% of the 2% raise, and then you raise your Medicaid rate to get the other 70%. Well, we don't have control over raising that rate. And so what they agreed to do was they raised literally all our services, residential and day, by this little bit amount without a problem, mainly because they had to do it anyway for the dollar raise. But when it came to case management and EI, Director Baker said, look, we just implemented waiver case management after a 1.5 year battle, and I'm not going to raise the rate. So if he doesn't raise that rate, we can't get the federal match. So Mary got him to agree to raise the rate in January. So at that point, we get the 70% match, we put it with the state, and they get the 2%. The question is, we missed the first 6 months, and they've given us the state match for the 2%, which is 30%. So to make them whole, we got to come up with another $500,000. We don't have $500,000 to contribute. And I think what I have personally learned during this whole exercise is, in the history of DDSN, when these things happen in the past, HHS did not do what they needed to do quick enough, and we kept on losing money and paying out of hide. That's my belief.
Okay.
And so we're finally holding the line, saying, look, we got to get this match because we really bankrupt ourselves by not being diligent. And it took a lot of effort to get them to raise these rates across the board and make it retroactive to July 1st. It took a lot of effort. And so in the past, when we had these rates, what would ultimately happen is they'd get around to it, but we might lose 3 months or 6 months of the match, of which we would eat out of pocket, which is contributing to where we are today. So I think that what this is more of a situational awareness that we're going to be sitting on $200,000 of legislative money that we have to do something with. And the answer is probably going to be a combination of calling our people at the General Assembly, and they might say, go ahead and release it pro rata to the providers. They might do that. They might say, give it back. But I know one thing, we can't spend it or it would look horrible if we said, well, we'll just use it for something else. So it's just kind of a predicament. And I think as a commissioner, with all the big things we're dealing with, this is the kind of thing you might hear about. So I think we're arming you that it's not resolved. I think people are pretty calm about it. And it's just we got to make a decision sometime in January about what to do with this 200,000.
Set the employees. If I'm Colleton, since Dean's here, and I've got 3 case managers, and I got 120 other employees. The other 120 employees got their raise. 3 case managers and EIs, they can get their raise, but the board has no money for it. So they're in a situation like, what do I do?
I mean, ultimately, there's 3 options. One of which is basically untenable. I mean, option 1 is we send the money back. Option 2 is we find some way to distribute $221 of state funds without any match. And option 3 is try to make up all the money on our own, which we can't do. I mean, what other options are there? I mean, that's where
I feel like, we need to go to the legislature and say, what do you want us to do? Because we are in this situation. We did not create this predicament. I mean, does the legislature not have some kind of agreement allocate the money to be matched?
You might want to restate that, Lori, because I think you broke up that last 2 sentences.
I'll try to jump in, Lori.
Okay.
I get it. I think we have to go back to them, and they could. Who knows? There may be a 4th scenario where they reach in their pocket and give us $500,000. I don't know if that's the case, but we do need an answer. We need to handle it systematically. But going forward, it is clear to me that once we get to fee for service, we will never be part of another 2% across the board raise. What we need to do is hawk these rates and keep the rates current so they can give their own 2%. And so much of what we've been doing to the boards has been very prescriptive because of this very paternal model. But as we go forward, I think that's going to end. But the good news is I think we'll be in a much better position and have more latitude to get individual rate increases so that we don't have to go down these complicated, awkward roads that seem to happen on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Laura. We got to get back to legislature
Sure,
as far as this
I
question.
agree.
I have a second question. When it does finally go into effect in January, this increase needs to be reflected in those reports that we're getting. You know, the 60% when we're looking at the case management reports, but there needs to be some adjustment within that. In other words,
Yeah.
you know, what we've been targeting that 60% amount.
That's
I
what
don't
I'm
want
saying. Yeah.
I don't want this increase to be.
We'll back it out.
Yeah, it needs
So apples to apples.
it
Yeah.
needs to
Right,
somehow
I see.
be reflected that now our
Yes.
target number is actually,
Yes.
I guess, 62% because they've had that 2%. Or I will leave it to the finance
I know
people
exactly
to
what you're
understand.
saying.
But I want us to have apples to apples numbers without reflecting these sorts of increases as far as hitting those targets.
I get 100%.
Okay.
Can I can I say something? This is Mary.
Hey.
I just got finished with the parent meeting. I just wanted to say that the 2%, I'm sure you explained this before I got on the call, is just going to go into the actual salary calculation,
As opposed to what?
as opposed to just throwing 2% on top of that rate.
Okay.
They're going to unwind the calculation, put the 2% in, and then recalculate. It's not going to change it a whole lot.
That's fine. I just want to make sure it's apples to apples.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
and as far as asking the legislators what we want, what to do with this, we can go back and raise that question again. I have not done it with an actual legislators. I've done it with their staff. But I can go back and say, this is what we're thinking about doing. Is this okay with you?
I think that's, to me,
Does
that
that
would be
work?
the appropriate thing to do. I mean, it's their money. They tell us what to do
Right.
with it.
Right, 30% of it, yep.
Well, all the money that we have right now, as far as that.
Well, yeah, it is, but they only give us the 30%.
Yeah.
The rest of it's pulled down and matched.
All the money that we're talking about
Yeah,
right now.
I mean,
Yes,
The available pool of money is all state money.
right, yep.
I find it surprising that when the legislature gives us the 30%, they haven't already made an arrangement with HHS that they're going to do their part to trigger the federal match.
I agree.
Yeah, yeah. That
Did
would
y'all
have
hear
been nice.
that?
They never.
I know Skype
Yeah,
is
yes,
messing up our audio.
Okay, I'm sorry, and it's probably me. I'm probably causing the problem. I agree, Lori. I agree. They didn't change the proviso even when we changed the way we're paying, which they should have done.
So just kind of like, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time with Skype because it's really slowing down the audio, but.
We'll go
Okay.
back to them.
Well, more to work on.
Yeah, always. As always.
But thank you for bringing it to our attention.
You will get
So that way when we get these questions, we can at least have some ability to answer it. And the answer is, yeah, it's a problem and we're trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
Nobody wants those people not to get money. I mean, that's sort of the downside.
Right.
All right. Want to move to number 5?
Sure. After meeting with Pat and discussing some of the issues we're having with our financial statements that we're getting, and some of the needs that we have in regards to cost settlements and Medicaid cost reporting and proper identification of grants, I've looked at a lot of audits since I've been here, and honestly, the expectations for the actual reporting that we're getting needs a lot of work as far as the schedules and so forth and the format of them. So I'm going to be taking the lead on the audit policy, and Kevin and I will work together because he's going to be seeing a lot of things out in the field that need to be incorporated into the audit policy. But I'm going to take the lead on that, and at least that's the intent, if y'all are okay with it. I want to get that done in January or February because there's going to be an extensive amount of changes I'm going to recommend to the committee that we make. One of the things that I have, being a former auditor and having been the finance director, if you will, and having people audit me, I know with 100% certainty that we have audit quality issues. Those firms that I have not worked with directly, pulling their audits and looking at them, they're even larger issues with the quality of their work. So what we're going to propose to y'all when we do this is we want to have a mandatory auditor training where the auditor has the firm to do our audits. They have to come in here and send a senior level staff to hear from us what issues need to be fixed and so forth. That's a big piece, I think, because the auditors, you have to sympathize with the auditors. They don't know our industry, and we're very, very, very complicated. We don't have a lot of guides. We don't have a lot of direction. We don't have a lot of details. And so they're cobbling together the best they know how to do. And we don't tell them these audit quality issues. Now, internal audit, and I'll let you speak to what your internal audit review is if you want to do that. But I know historically we relied on LLR, the Labor License and Regulation, to do our desk reviews. I think we box those up and send them over to them once a year. The issue is, being an LLR reviewer, I do those reviews, is I'm the only one pulling DSN board audits out of the box. There's 40 CPAs in a room. Everybody's grabbing counties and school districts and water districts and all these other universities. And Chris Clark's the only one up there getting DSN board audits out, looking at them. So I can't obviously do those anymore because of my situation here. But we need to have an internal audit quality check process, and we haven't to this point really had that capacity. I think we probably have the capability, but not the capacity. So we're going to initiate a internal desk review process in my area, in addition to whatever Kevin looks at, and we'll coordinate with him again on make sure there's not any duplication. Some of the other issues I need. All right, so the school Department of Education, they have a school district audit guide. It's 400 pages almost, which I don't want a 400-page guide, but I want to model our guide off similar to what the Department of Ed does, because the school district audits are very high quality. One of the things, for example, I want to steal from them is they actually have CPA firms come in and help write the audit guide. They have 6 firms that they list and give credit for in the guide that actually come in and they're part of the review process because they're keeping up with the GASBs, the FASBs, the audit directives. And so that gives them a shot at helping us write a good guide. So I want to look at that, and then we need to discuss, how we go about identifying those firms. We need the Department of Ed requires them to do to Department of Ed schedule. They're required to go through and compute any monies that are owed to the department. They have to know all the rules. They have to do the computations. It's part of the audit. I want to make our auditors do that with our settlements, because right now we're having a really hard time with audit quality. We can't identify, for example, we may have grants out there, but they're just coding it just any old place, and we can't even tell where it is. So it's creating a lot of problems. Also, the room and board calculation process. I would like to put in there that they are going to do a schedule that identifies all the room and board costs, because right now our room and board calculation review is not that good. We do the best we can with the data we have, but just to give you an example, in our audit report, we have an account called telephone. Well, that could have internet, cable TV in it, cell phones, landlines, not all that board. So it's hard for Casey when she's reviewing room and board to identify those different costs. We also have an issue with Medicaid. We think they're going to disallow OPEB and GASB 68 costs potentially. They've identified that as questionable. So I need to be able to readily identify that in our audit report so that we can tease that out, because that's not going to be allowed. So there's a host of things that I hope to do. Like I said, I value Kevin's knowledge, his background, he's going to have a team out there with boots on the ground, and by all means, this needs to be a collaborative process. So I don't intend to, to think I know everything and not seek Kevin's input. But I wanted to ask y'all if y'all had any questions on that. I will obviously present to y'all all the different changes I'd like to make at a future date, but I just want to give you some ideas of what I'm looking at right now.
That sounds like a sound plan, in my opinion. So
Okay.
I don't have any questions. I mean, that I can think of, but
I don't have any questions either.
yeah.
And the only comment that I'll make is with all of these things, and probably Chris, I look back when you say the room and board calculations. I of course immediately go back to the fiasco of a couple years ago with how those are being calculated and the differing versions of how that was being done. Whatever we come up with as a plan to send down to these people, we just need to make it clear. If we want them to follow a certain procedure, we need to make that procedure easy for the people who are doing it to understand. We don't want to have vague generalities of we're sending out this directive and just do it without providing them the proper tools to do it. That's what I would look for out of the guide. I just want to make sure we don't run into that sort of problem again.
And I think having external parties come in, maybe even involve a finance director or two to help develop it, they can pick it apart and say, well, have you thought about this? That I don't understand that. I don't think the auditors will. You know what I'm saying? So I do feel like external involvement would be beneficial to help address that in particular.
We just don't want somebody to get this guide and they come back to us and say,
Yeah.
we understand what you want, but we don't understand how we're supposed to do it. That's ultimately, to my mind, the obligation of this agency to make sure that stuff is crystal clear.
And
how to do it.
The Department of Ed, if you want to do a school district audit, they send out an email and say, we're having an auditor training on this day. You need to send, and so they sit you down and they go over the guide and make sure you know exactly what you need. So, all righty. And I appreciate Kevin's willingness to work with me on that change.
Okay.
Are we on number 6 then?
All right, sounds good.
All right, so I guess y'all know that we were just talking about the 187.66 we get for residential services. That's all we get for residential services, but we have a process here that's been here forever where if you have a consumer that has excessive needs, right now I think it's 107,000 or something like that, around that number, an expense, you can submit for outlier request, which is additional funding. We get no extra funding for that. That's just straight out of our hide, that's state dollars. Our current contracts, we have $7.3 million in outliers that we funded. That includes residential and at-home outliers. The majority of that is residential. So we do have an outlier process, but we have limited dollars which to give out because we don't have, whenever we give those monies, we don't have a resource to retrieve them. So we have to be really prudent on the way that we do our outlier funding. Our existing outlier system is very messed up. I guess I can use that
Vague.
term.
Ad hoc.
It is not transparent. It's not reliable. It's not consistent. It's not equitable. So we've been reviewing our outlier process. Now the issue is we don't want to put a ton of effort into this because we're moving to a fee-for-service model. Let's say that happens in 2 or 3 years. We can't just shut down our outlier review process for 2 or 3 years. So we got to come up with something. So I've been meeting with my folks, and then Rufus and Pat are involved to develop a brand new system. And I don't just want y'all to know that we are getting ready to roll out, and that you let us know if you want to review it or not, or approve it. A very formal process. It'll consider financial capability. When we look at financial capability, we're going to dig into what if an agency's losing money, we don't want to just throw additional money at them without first reviewing to see if it's from poor operational decisions. So when we talk about financial, we're not going to only look at how, if they lose money, we're not going to just move them to the front of the line for outlier funding. We're going to dig down into it and really tease that apart and see what's creating that loss. But we are going to consider financial capacity. You know, the capitated funding system is an averaging system, so the intent is that any monies that you make per se on a consumer are used to serve other consumers, and it averages out. And so we need to make sure that those funds that are sitting out there are used for services before we give them more money for services. And then we're also going to look at the consumers and their needs. There are going to be some assessments that are going to be reliable. And so the system that we're going to develop will be very transparent. Everybody will know the rules. As Pat said to me earlier today, you know, boards may even say, look, there's no need for me to even ask because I know what they're going to run me through and they're never going to approve this. So we want it to be very, very open, honest, predictable. We're going to have like a waiting list concept so people know, look, I'm number 3 on the list. I just missed because we have a limited amount of dollars. We can't just fund everybody that may have a justifiable increase request. So I just want y'all to be aware that we're working on that and give y'all an opportunity to ask questions. Pat, did you want to speak to anything on that?
We're just trying to be fair. As resources get tighter, we have to be better at fair and equitable and transparent. And this system has been bouncing along for a long time. And as long as there was money in the system, people really didn't push it. But dollars matter today, so we just got to be fair and clear. And I think people are looking forward to it. Some predictability to the outlier process. And like most things, I think Gary's been around the longest, is the vagueness causes the problem. Specificity and clarity is what people want, because then they can get through the system or not even enter the system. And so I think that's the common theme I see to improve things, and Chris is all over this, and it will help the system. But we need to let you know as commissioners, when you start messing with outliers, they're the kind of questions you're going to get. And so all we're saying is we're using this forum as a kind of a warm-up of what we're doing. But before we go final, I feel certain we would present it to you guys and say, here are the options we consider. These are the pros and cons. I feel certain that we'd vet it in front of the monthly finance committee to get input. So you will have, when we get to you, everybody's best input so that we don't put you in a box of concurring with something that hasn't been fully vetted.
Yeah, I'll just say, from the standpoint of need, I like this idea a lot, because I think one of the most common complaints I've gotten is there's a group of haves and haves not. If the haves applied for an outlier, it got approved by whatever weird process it seemed to happen. If you were in the group, you got it. If you weren't in the group, maybe not. And it seemed to shift who was in the group and who wasn't in the group depending on whether you got approved, but it really was not particularly transparent. It was not particularly ordered. The question I have is, are we talking about a retroactive application of this? In other words, is the plan to look back at those who are currently receiving outliers, or just for those who are applying for new outliers until we get that changeover?
My approach would be, going forward, would be my suggestion, because under the prior rules and whatever method is, you know, that would, I don't know if you disagree with that, but I mean, my approach would be for new ones.
Yeah. People have to get renewed. Would they be renewed through the new process?
Yes, rejustification.
Yeah, we're not going to go back and evaluate ones that have been prior approved, but when the approval comes up, they go through the process.
Because that's where you also get a lot of complaints. When you take money away from somebody, people start hollering. So that's always more difficult than saying, okay, under the new system. But I love this idea of making it more transparent. Anything that we can do to make this kind of financial thing more transparent, I will.
Right.
It's a source of a lot of angst that I've gotten over the years of complaints.
And I've got a draft of the initial run through of the outlier process, and Rufus and Pat have already reviewed it, and so we're going to have to continue to refine that. But this is well underway. I really feel like come your January meeting, we'll have something nailed down with feedback even provided from the provider network at that point.
I'd like to see, you said you offered for us to look at a draft of that?
Yeah, I have. Yes, ma'am. I have a draft of it that I can send to the three of you if you'd like to look it over.
Yeah, I would. I think that'd be good.
Okay. Just realize it's still being picked apart by Rufus and Pat as they poke hole. I've reviewed it with my team, but Rufus has to look at it from a programmatic perspective, and he sees that. What's that? I thought somebody said something, but yeah, I'll email that to you after the meeting's over.
Okay. And this outlier funding is only for residential?
In-home and residential.
Okay.
At home.
Okay.
There's a smaller threshold for folks in the
Right.
at home.
At home is 36 or 37,000 is the threshold you have to clear. So it's much smaller.
Okay. All right. No, I agree. This sounds like a good, another great idea and something that definitely should be done. So, all right. Anything else on the outlier? I don't know if Mary's trying to talk or Lori, because I feel like somebody's trying to say something.
It sounded like Lori said me too with regard to receiving a copy of it via email. That's what I heard.
Okay.
And I know she's having audio.
Yeah, I'll send it to all
Flag.
three of you.
All right.
It wasn't me.
Oh.
Okay. Then I'm totally off base, and that's not new either. Sorry, Lori.
Maybe it was Mary, since she's the hardest to hear, in my opinion, on this call. All right, well then, should we move on to the last item? Update on Union County.
Yep, short and sweet. The good news is this for informational purposes. We're not asking for y'all to vote on anything. Just wanted to give you an update. Gary, I'm sure you remember. Laurie, I'm not sure the time frames, but back in October of 17, we were asked by the Union Disability Board to come in there. They had some suspected invoices they were looking at in consumer funds for one house. They had contacted local law enforcement. So we went in there and did an analysis. They did, in fact, have a house manager that was exploiting the four ladies in that house. They got some local coverage at that time. We were working with the local solicitor. In August, they did find her guilty of exploitation. She was sentenced for a year. But for some reason, the judge wanted to hold over the restitution part of that hearing. So we just had that week before last, and he did sign a judgment. She is to reimburse the full audited question amount, $26,730.31. And so we did get that judgment, and I'm assuming after she serves her time, they will start working out some kind of arrangements.
Is that payable to the board or to the consumer?
That's that when she pays it, it will be payable to the board because the board has already made the four affected individuals whole. So they were reimbursed.
Depends on if she's placed on probation following her active sentence. So if she's placed on probation, then that restitution amount will be part of her probationary requirements. But the other rule on that is if somebody is doing everything they can and they can't make the payments, that's not a violation of your probation. We don't have debtor's prison, essentially. So ultimately, you can go through 5 years of probation being the max amount of time. Then it gets converted over to a civil judgment, which is you can't get blood out of a stone.
Right. Right.
So it can be of limited value. I'll just put it to you that way. I deal with that all the time.
Now, it did come up in court. She has been approved through Social Security for disability. She is also, as I mentioned to the solicitor, she is vested in the retirement system because she has been there long enough. The retirement system criteria, if you're approved by Social Security for disability, then you're approved under state retirement for disability. So she should have an income stream coming in, and that was my thing to the solicitor. If we attach, I don't care if it's $10 a month, but some portion of that is.
And really the follow-up is not with the solicitor's office that you want to make sure on that. It's with probation and parole.
She did.
They're the people that enforce that.
She did state that, and
Yeah.
she said, in this case, fortunately, due to it being a small county, she has contact with those people.
Yeah, Union County Probation Parole is actually, assuming Molly's still over there, I actually know one of the agents over there pretty well. And it's a pretty good office. If they know stuff, they'll keep an eye on it.
Right.
Yeah.
So she said she'd be able to
Okay.
be in touch with them.
If you have any other issues, I know the senior solicitor over there in Union County, John Anthony, I know him really, really well.
Well, I
I know
hope we
John.
don't, but if we do, I'll be in touch. And that was it, unless there's any questions or comments.
No. I mean, if Union County is not reimbursed by this criminal, will we have to possibly pay to help them out to pay back that? Like, would they come to us and say we've got a deficit of 20,000 and
Well, I mean,
pay for it, help us with this cost or whatever, like they do sometimes when they're don't have budget, I don't know.
right. Well, they already made these young ladies whole back when it happened.
Right, but would they come back to us and say, we can't get the 20,000 from this person, the criminal, can y'all spot us for this because it's making our budget 20,000,
And that's never happened in my 20 years. Now, what did happen in this one that was sort of a snafu is, so we require a board staff fidelity bond coverage, but their fidelity bond, their insurer denied the claim, saying it says right here it's currency and it's changed and it has to happen on premises. And these were actually checks and debit cards that happened in local retailers. And so they did not get anything reimbursed by their, yeah.
That sounds to me like somebody should have been suing the insurer for denial of coverage, man. That sounds like a really
I got a
weak
case.
denial of coverage.
Yeah.
Well, I do know that they made I think they did reach out actually to an attorney, and
That's
their local agent, wrote to the company on their behalf. So they did make some efforts to try to get something, but they didn't. So they are out this money out of their operating
insurance companies making lawyers look good.
funds.
Sorry.
All right. I appreciate all of the work on all this. I think this is really good discussion and updates, and I don't have anything else unless anybody has anything that we should discuss for today.
One thing that we raised, I think, before you guys got on was Chris pointed out that previously as an auditor, he's pointed out that the subcommittees should have a minutes system in place, that we should be doing minutes on these meetings. This being a classic example, that we have one item that we took an action on that would be presented to the board, but we've got 3 or 4 significant updates that would be really handy to have a record of exactly what was said and what was told that exists outside of the recording, I think this would be a good place to start because there's a lot of information on here that will be very handy to have reduced to writing for new people coming on board, new commissioners.
Totally.
So
Could Sam go back and do minutes from this recording for us?
yeah, and it may be a factor of Chris, since a lot of this was your presentations of things you intend to do or are working on to coordinate with her to make sure that the salient points are within that. But I think that would be a good idea going forward.
I agree.
For all subcommittees.
Yeah, for all subcommittees, but I think this sort of highlights the need for that. This is a lot more than some of those quick, we got to approve 3 things, and it's all going to the commission. Those are easy. This had a lot of information that is not subject to that.
Right. And Chris, to your point you made earlier is that, you want to use these meetings as, ways to update us and give us detail and talk through things. And so it sounds like a lot of these meetings will be more like this as opposed to maybe in the past, maybe, I don't know, just going off of your comments in the past few months about, really utilizing these meetings consistently to keep us updated and talk through things. So.
Yes, ma'am. I mean, I feel like in the commission meetings, y'all have so much to deal with that's not financial related, but the financial status that we're in and all the change that we're in the middle of making, y'all need to be up to speed and informed so that if you get calls or, you're in the commission meeting, you've got a lot more background information to make good decisions.
And even like the stuff we're not taking action on, if we have the tab on